Here is the 2 Kings chapter 10, 1-17. In chapter 9, we saw how Jehu carried out God's judgment by killing Jezebel, Ahab's wife. Today's passage continues the story with the God's judgment on Ahab's family. Jehu wipes out all the Ahab's remaining descendants. But here's where the things get tricky. Jehu goes beyond just the northern kingdom of Israel and kills a relative of King Ahaziah of Judah too. This raised the question, how much of Jehu's action were truly God's command, and how much was his own ambition? Sometimes the way God's plan unfolds doesn't always look holy to us. A good example is how God used Babylon to judge Israel. Jehu in today's passage was clearly used as God's tool for judgment, but you can also see his personal motive creeping in. There are two important takeaways from this passage. First, God can use human evil to accomplish his will, but he will also judge those who commit evil. Second, it's not enough to just be used by God like a tool. You have to focus on relationship with him. Tools are thrown away when they are no longer needed, but those who walk with God last. Think about unclogging the toilet. You need a tool to fix the problem, but once it's done, you throw the tool away. In the same way, it's not just about being used by God, but about staying in close relationship with him. So, what are you focusing on? Here is how the passage breaks down into the three sections. First, northern Israel, Ahab's sons and remaining descendants are killed. Second, south Judah, Ahaziah brothers are killed. Third, the remaining supporters of Ahab's family in Samaria are killed. First section is Ahab's sons and remaining descendants are killed. 1-11. In verse 1, it says that Ahab's 70 sons were in Samaria. After Jezebel and Ahab's son Joram were killed, it seems that the rest of Ahab's family fled to Samaria. Jehu sent the two letters to test them. The first letter in verses 2 and 3 challenges their courage by saying, "Pick the wisest among you to be a king and come fight me." But in verse 4, the people are terrified, realizing both kings, Joram and Ahaziah, were already dead by God's judgment. In verse 5, they declare themselves to be Jehu's servants, agreeing to do whatever he asked. With the first letter, Jehu confirmed their fear and submission. In verse 6, Jehu sends a second letter, this time testing their loyalty. He orders them to bring the head of the Ahab's 70 sons by the next day. In verse 7, they obey, beheading Ahab's descendants and sending their head to Jezreel, where Jehu was. In verse 8, Jehu places the head at the city gate as a warning to prevent a rebellion. In verse 9, Jehu addressed the people saying, "I killed my master Joram, but who killed these 70? He makes 2 points. First, the people are on his side. And second, that they are the ones who chose to kill Ahab's son, not him. In verse 10, Jehu declares that all of this was a fulfill of the Lord's judgment against Ahab's family as prophesied by Elijah. In verse 11, he continues to wipe out everyone connected to Ahab's family, including the priests, in city of Jezreel. Second section, Ahaziah's brothers are killed. Verses 12-14. As Jehu has toured Samaria, he meets the brother of King Ahaziah of Judah at a sheep-shearing houses. In verse 14, Jehu, knowing who they are, orders the execution of all 42 of them. This raises the question, did Jehu cross the line here? Did he go beyond God's command? Possibly for political reason. In Hosea chapter 1 verse 4, God warns that he will punish the Jehu for the bloodshed in Jezreel, suggesting that Jehu may have gone beyond the limit of God's judgment, driven by his own zeal. Third section, the remaining supporters of Ahab's family in Samaria are killed. 15-17. In verse 15, Jehu meets Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, on his way to Samaria. Jehonadab is mentioned in Jeremiah chapter 35. Where his descendants are described as living unique lifestyle, avoiding wine and living as a nomad. Even though they weren't Israelites, they were highly respected for their devotion to God. In verse 15, Jehu asked Jehonadab, "Is your heart right with mine?" When Jehonadab agrees, Jehu invites him into his chariot. In verse 16, Jehu says, "Come with me and see my zeal for the Lord," revealing his passionate, perhaps overso. In verse 17, Jehu arrives in Samaria and eliminates everyone connected to Ahab's family, fulfilling the word of the Lord through the Elijah. Here is what we see in today's passage. Jehu was used as a tool of God's judgment, but along the way, he crossed God's boundaries. God didn't use him to bring judgment on Ahab's family, but Jehu, driven by his own passion and desires, went too far and shed more blood than was necessary. We often want to be used by God, but the goal shouldn't just be being used. It should be walking with God. If we walk with Him, we need two things. First, humility. We need to realize that we can be used and then set aside like any tool. Humility means we seek God's guidance and stay within His boundaries. Sometimes God works in ways that don't always make sense to us, even using evil as a tool of a judgment. But in all things, we need to trust His sovereignty. We must focus on the relationship with Him. Staying within the boundary He sets is crucial. Think of examples like Moses striking the rock twice, David ordering a census without God's approval, or King Saul offering a sacrifice on his own. These are all instances where people went beyond God's commands. In the end, what really matters isn't our passion, but our commitment to seeking God and walking with Him. Let's walk with God today.